The sky was clear, and the fields stretched wide under the warm spring sun. Tom stood beside his old green tractor, wiping his hands on a rag. The machine was not new, but it was strong and reliable. For many years, it had helped him plant seeds, harvest crops, and carry the heavy load of farming. Tom often joked that the tractor had more patience than most people he knew. Planting season was the busiest time of the year for Tom. The soil was ready, the seeds were stored in the barn, and the whole week was planned out. Each day mattered. If the planting was delayed, the harvest would suffer, and the farm's income would fall short. Farming was not just a job for Tom, it was his life. The small town where Tom lived was changing. More houses were being built, more people were moving in, and the land that once felt open and free now felt crowded with new rules. At the center of these rules was Karen, the leader of the homeowners association. She was known in town for her sharp words and endless complaints. Karen cared less about farming and more about appearances. To her, everything had to be neat and polished. She liked trimmed lawns, painted fences, and shiny cars parked in straight lines. Dusty tractors, muddy boots, and fields full of soil did not fit her idea of a beautiful neighborhood. Tom had learned to stay quiet whenever Karen spoke. He believed it was better to spend time working than to argue. But sometimes Karen pushed too far. On the first morning of planting season, Tom climbed into his tractor. The engine coughed and then roared as it came to life. He smiled, hearing the sound that marked the start of his work. But before he could begin, a silver car stopped near the edge of his field. The window rolled down, and Karen leaned out, wearing her sunglasses and holding a clipboard as if she was a police officer. "Tom," she said firmly, "you cannot leave that tractor parked out here. It is an eyesore. It violates community standards." Tom frowned. He had expected something like this, but not on the very first day of planting. "This is a tractor," he said calmly. "It belongs in the field. I'm starting work right now." Karen shook her head. "Rules are rules. The tractor is old and messy. People driving by see it, and they complain. If you do not move it, I will have it towed." Tom leaned on the steering wheel. "Towed? You want to tow a tractor during planting season? This is farmland. My family has planted here for generations." Karen did not blink. "It does not matter. The association has standards, and I will not allow this machine to spoil the view. I already called the tow truck. It should be here shortly." Tom's eyes narrowed. He turned his head and saw, in the distance, a truck slowly rolling down the road. His heart sank for a moment. Losing the tractor, even for a few days, would ruin his work. The seeds would sit in the barn while the soil dried, and the whole season would be in danger. Karen, however, seemed satisfied with herself. She parked her shiny silver car near the edge of the field, pulled out her clipboard, and began writing notes. She was so busy with her papers that she did not notice the way Tom studied her car. It sat there like it owned the land, wheels just touching the dirt, polished paint reflecting the sunlight. It was the opposite of his tractor, new, shiny, and without a scratch. And it was in the worst possible place to be on a planting day. Tom felt anger rise in his chest, but with it came a spark of humor. If Karen believed his tractor did not belong in the field, then perhaps her car would make a fine substitute. He sat back in his seat and thought quickly. Farming had taught him to be creative. Tools were not just for one job, they could always be used in new ways if the moment demanded it. And this moment demanded something Karen would never forget. The sound of the tow truck grew louder. Karen tapped her pen against her clipboard and glanced at her watch. Tom gripped the tractor's wheel, and a slow smile spread across his face. He was not going to beg, and he was not going to argue. Instead, he would teach Karen a simple lesson about planting season and about where machines did and did not belong. The tractor engine rumbled as Tom pressed the pedal. He guided the machine forward, not into the rows of soil, but toward the car parked proudly by the field. Karen looked up in surprise, her sunglasses slipping down her nose. "What are you doing?" she shouted. Tom did not answer. His eyes were fixed on the shiny silver car, the perfect piece of neighborhood beauty that Karen loved so much. Soon, she was about to learn what it felt like to be part of planting season, whether she wanted it or not. The rumble of Tom's tractor echoed across the field as he steered it closer to Karen's silver car. Dust rose under the heavy wheels, and the smell of fresh soil mixed with the smell of fuel. Karen's eyes widened as she realized what he was about to do. "Tom, stop this at once," she shouted, stepping out of her car with her clipboard clutched tightly in her hand. "This is private property damage. You will regret this." But Tom did not slow down. The tractor rolled forward with steady strength. He was not aiming to crush the car, he was a farmer, not a destroyer. He wanted to make a point, not create chaos. So, instead of rolling over it, he lowered the farming attachment on the back of the tractor. The machine's blades dug into the soil and began pulling up dirt. He circled around the car slowly, cutting a wide groove around it. Karen's jaw dropped. "What on earth are you doing?" "Planting season," Tom replied simply, his voice calm but firm. Within minutes, he had circled the car with deep rows of soil. He pressed the lever again, and the machine dropped neat lines of seed into the fresh ground. Then, with a steady rhythm, he covered the seeds, leaving the silver car in the middle of a small square field. Karen's face turned red as she waved her clipboard. "You cannot do this. My car is stuck. How dare you?" Tom turned off the engine and looked at her. "You wanted my tractor gone because it did not fit your view. Now your car is part of the view. Congratulations, Karen. You have been planted." Karen gasped in outrage, but before she could reply, the tow truck finally arrived. The driver, a tall man with a dusty cap, stopped his truck and stared at the sight before him. A shiny silver car was sitting in the middle of freshly planted soil, completely surrounded. "What in the world happened here?" the driver asked. Karen rushed over to him. "This man. This farmer. He trapped my car in the middle of a field. You must tow his tractor immediately." The driver scratched his head and looked at Tom. "That your tractor?" Tom nodded. "Yes. It is planting season. I was working when she parked her car right in the way. I told her, this is farmland, not a showroom. She ignored me." The driver looked back at the silver car and let out a laugh he tried to hide. "Ma'am, even if I wanted to tow his tractor, it is not illegal to park it on his own farmland." "But your car? Well, it looks like you parked it in the wrong place." Karen's eyes widened with disbelief. "Wrong place? I am the head of the association. I set the rules." The driver shook his head. "Not here, you don't. Out here, the rules belong to the land. If you want me to tow your car, I can try, but getting it out of that fresh soil is going to cost a lot." Karen stamped her foot. "This is unfair. You cannot side with him. Look at my car." Tom folded his arms. "You told me my tractor did not belong here. But your car? It does not belong here either. Now you know how it feels when someone tries to take away the tools you depend on." The driver leaned against his truck, clearly amused. "You want me to call a second truck to drag that car out, or are you planning to wait until harvest?" Tom gave a half smile. "I am in no hurry. The soil is rich. Maybe something good will grow around it." Karen threw up her hands in frustration. She stormed back to her car, only to realize she could not drive it forward without tearing through the fresh soil. The tires were already slipping slightly in the soft dirt. She sat inside, fuming, as if the car itself had betrayed her. For Tom, the moment was more than just a joke. It was a reminder that farming was not about rules written on paper, it was about respect for the land and for the work it demanded. Machines like his tractor were not decorations. They were lifelines. The tow truck driver finally shrugged. "Well, ma'am, I'll get you out, but it'll take time. Next time, maybe don't park in a farmer's field." Karen glared at Tom as if her stare alone could change the situation. "This isn't over, Tom. You will regret embarrassing me." Tom looked at her evenly. "I don't care about embarrassment. I care about planting. You tried to take that away. I just gave you a little lesson." The driver climbed back into his truck, muttering with a grin, "Best lesson I've seen in years." As the tow truck began to set up equipment, Tom returned to his tractor. He started the engine again and drove to the other side of the field. The sound of the machine rose above Karen's angry muttering, and the soil opened under its weight. He worked steadily, row after row, the way his father had taught him. And though the season had begun with conflict, Tom felt lighter. He had defended his work without shouting or fighting. He had used the very land itself to make his point. The seeds were in the ground, and Karen's car was trapped in the middle, a shining reminder that farming could not be bullied into silence. The day after Karen's car was pulled out of Tom's field, the whole town was talking. Farmers at the feed store laughed quietly as they shared the story. Children at the bus stop giggled and drew little pictures of tractors chasing cars. Even the clerk at the gas station smirked when Karen pulled up to fill her tank. Karen, however, was not laughing. Her face burned every time she saw someone whisper behind her back. She was used to being the one in control, the one who gave orders and made others follow. But Tom had turned her rules upside down, and now she looked foolish. Sitting at her polished dining table, Karen tapped her nails against her coffee mug. "This farmer thinks he can embarrass me. He thinks his tractor is more important than the rules of this neighborhood. He has no idea who he is dealing with." She opened her thick binder of association papers and flipped through the pages. There were regulations about fences, about lawns, about the color of mailboxes. None of them gave her control over farmland, and that was the problem. She needed a way to pull Tom under her authority, to make him bend to her rules. An idea began to form. If she could not control the farm through the association, maybe she could use the town council. After all, there were always new laws being discussed. If she convinced the right people, she could push rules that made it harder for Tom to use his tractor or even harder for him to keep his land. That afternoon, Karen marched into the council office with her clipboard. She greeted the clerk with a smile that was more sharp than kind. "I would like to discuss a new proposal," she said. "It's about the appearance of the farmland near the new houses. Some of us believe the tractors and equipment left in view lower the beauty of the community." The clerk raised an eyebrow. "You mean Tom's farm?" Karen stiffened. "I am speaking generally. But yes, that area in particular. It's untidy, and it bothers the residents." The clerk wrote something down. "You'll have to bring it to the next meeting. You'll need support from other members." Karen left the office with determination in her step. She began visiting neighbors, going door to door with her neat stack of papers. She spoke with smooth words, talking about improving property values and making the neighborhood look more beautiful. Some neighbors nodded politely but refused to sign her petition. Others, especially those who had never lived near farmland before, agreed. By the end of the week, she had collected a pile of signatures. It was not everyone, but it was enough to make her confident. Meanwhile, Tom was busy in his fields. He rose early each morning, worked until the sun was low, and returned home with sore muscles but a calm heart. The soil was ready, the seeds were sprouting, and the rhythm of farming gave him peace. He heard bits of gossip about Karen's anger, but he did not worry. He believed the land spoke louder than her rules. One evening, as Tom was oiling the tractor, his neighbor Mark walked over from across the road. Mark was a tall man with a kind face, and he had known Tom since they were boys. "Tom," Mark said, leaning on the fence. "You should know something. Karen's going around with papers. She's trying to get the council to set new rules about how the farm looks. She's saying tractors shouldn't be left in view. She's trying to tie you down with her association business." Tom wiped his hands and frowned. "Figures. She can't stand to lose." "Did many people sign?" "Some," Mark admitted. "Mostly folks who just moved here. They don't understand farming. They think tractors are ugly and noisy. They like pretty lawns, not soil and seed. But plenty of us refused. Still, she's loud enough that the council might listen." Tom nodded slowly. He was not angry, but he felt a heavy weight in his chest. Farming was hard enough without extra battles. If Karen truly managed to push rules through, his work would suffer. "Thanks for telling me," Tom said. Mark clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't let her scare you. You've got friends here, and everyone knows the farm keeps this town alive." That night, Tom sat on his porch, watching the stars. The air smelled of fresh earth, and in the distance he could hear frogs by the stream. He thought about his father, who had always said, "Respect the land, and it will carry you through storms." Tom believed that, but now the storm was not from the sky, it was from Karen. The next day, a notice arrived in his mailbox. It was from the town council. It said there would be a meeting to discuss appearance standards for farms near residential areas. Tom held the paper for a long time, then folded it neatly and put it on the table. Karen was not done. She had lost one battle in the field, but now she was moving the fight into offices and meetings. Tom knew he would have to stand his ground again, but this time with words instead of tractors. He looked across the road and saw Mark waving. A few other farmers were gathering near the fence, talking quietly. Tom realized he was not alone. The land connected them all, and together, they might be strong enough to face whatever Karen planned next. The evening of the council meeting arrived, and the small town hall was filled with people. Farmers in worn boots sat on one side, while newer residents in polished shoes filled the other. The air was thick with quiet whispers. Everyone knew the meeting would not be ordinary. At the front of the room, the 5 council members sat behind a long wooden table. Papers were stacked high, and the sound of chairs scraping echoed as the last few people found their seats. Karen entered with her usual confidence, her silver pen and clipboard in hand. She wore a bright jacket, and her eyes scanned the room as if she were preparing for a performance. She smiled at those who had signed her petition and gave short, sharp nods to those who had not. Tom arrived quietly. He wore clean but simple clothes, and his hands were still rough from working in the field that morning. Mark and 2 other farmers walked beside him, giving him strength with their presence. Tom did not carry papers or charts. He carried only the truth of his work and the respect he had for the land. The council chairperson tapped a gavel on the table. "We are here tonight to discuss a new proposal concerning appearance standards for farmland that borders residential areas. Mrs. Karen will present her concerns first." Karen stood tall and cleared her throat. "Thank you. I speak not only for myself but for many residents who want our town to look beautiful. When people drive by, they see rusty tractors parked near the road, muddy equipment, and untidy rows. This lowers the value of homes and spoils the community's charm. We must have rules that protect our neighborhoods. No one is saying farmers should stop working, but their tools should be stored out of sight. The farmland should not look messy." She waved her petition high. "I have signatures from dozens of concerned residents who agree with me. We must act now if we want our town to grow in the right direction." Polite claps rose from a small part of the crowd, mostly new homeowners. Karen smiled, confident she had made her case. The chairperson nodded. "Thank you. Now, Tom, Would you like to respond? Tom stood slowly, adjusting his hat. His voice was calm but carried across the room. I am not here to argue about beauty. I am here to speak about work. Farming is not always pretty, but it is necessary. The tractor you see is not decoration. It is the tool that puts food on your tables. It is the tool that keeps this town alive. He paused, letting the words sink in. My father used this land, and his father before him. We respect it, we care for it, and we depend on it. If you hide tractors and stop farmers from working freely, you are not protecting the town, you are choking it. A shiny neighborhood means nothing if there is no food in the stores. Some farmers nodded firmly. A few townspeople clapped softly. Mark stood and added, with respect, Karen's car was once parked right in Tom's field. Did that help the beauty of the land? No. Tom did what any farmer would do, he showed her that fields are for farming, not for polished cars. If we punish farmers for working, we are punishing the very people who built this town. Karen's face turned red. That was a childish act. He humiliated me in front of everyone. An older council member leaned forward. Mrs. Karen, it seems to me that the farmer made a point. Your petition is about appearances, but farming has never been about appearances. It is about survival. The room murmured with agreement. Some of the newer residents shifted uncomfortably. One young man raised his hand. I moved here last year. At first, I thought the tractors were ugly. But now I buy fresh vegetables from Tom's farm every week. I realized the machines may not look neat, but they feed us better than any store can. Others nodded, voices rising one by one. The farms give us food. The land must stay free. We can't eat beauty. Karen's smile began to fade. She waved her clipboard desperately. But property values. Don't you see? If we let things look messy, houses will sell for less. We must think of the future. Tom looked at her. Without farms, there is no future. This town cannot eat property values. It cannot eat rules on paper. It needs harvests. The chairperson tapped the gavel again. Enough. We have heard both sides. We will vote. The council members whispered among themselves. The room was silent, everyone waiting. Finally, the chairperson spoke. We respect the work of farmers, and we will not pass rules that limit their tools or their land. Farming is part of our town's life, and it must remain so. The crowd broke into claps and cheers from the farmers and many townsfolk. Even some who had signed Karen's petition joined in, realizing how important the land was. Karen sat frozen, her fingers gripping the clipboard tightly. Her plan had failed. Tom had not shouted, had not insulted her. He had spoken simply, and the people had listened. Tom sat down quietly, his face calm but his heart steady with relief. The storm had passed for now, but he knew Karen's pride would not let her stop. She would find another way to fight him. Outside, the night was cool and quiet. Tom walked home with Mark by his side. The stars shone above the dark fields, and the smell of earth drifted through the air. For Tom, the land had spoken again, and its voice was stronger than any rulebook. Karen left the council meeting with her jaw tight and her hands shaking. The sound of clapping for Tom still echoed in her ears. She had walked into that room expecting victory, but instead, she had walked out defeated. As she drove home, she spoke to herself. Fine. If they won't make rules, I'll make my own way. That farmer thinks he's clever, but he doesn't know who he's dealing with. In the days that followed, Karen kept a low profile. She smiled politely at neighbors and attended her usual meetings, but inside, she was planning. She knew she could not fight Tom in public again, not after the way the town had stood with him. Instead, she decided to work in secret. One afternoon, while Tom was working far on the south side of his fields, Karen parked her silver car on a side road and walked toward the northern edge of his land. She carried a bag of grass seeds, the type used to cover lawns. Her idea was simple: if she spread grass seed across part of Tom's field, it would mix with his crops and ruin the rows. By the time he noticed, it would be too late. Karen crouched low, looking around nervously. She scattered the seeds by hand, smiling as they fell across the soil. "Let's see how your perfect farming looks when weeds take over," she whispered. But Karen was not as quiet as she believed. On the other side of the fence, young Sarah, the daughter of Tom's neighbor Mark, had been walking her dog. She watched with wide eyes as Karen tossed handfuls of seed onto the field. Sarah was only 12, but she understood enough about farming to know this was wrong. She ran back to her house and burst through the door. "Dad! Dad! Karen's messing with Tom's field. She's throwing something into the soil." Mark set down his newspaper and stood quickly. "Are you sure?" Sarah nodded hard. "I saw her. She had a bag, and she was spreading it all over." Mark wasted no time. He grabbed his hat and hurried outside, calling over 2 other farmers who lived nearby. Together they walked toward the edge of Tom's field. By the time they arrived, Karen had already dumped nearly half her bag of seeds. She froze when she saw them. "What are you doing?" Mark asked sharply. Karen straightened, clutching the bag. "Nothing. Just walking. Getting some fresh air." "Fresh air with grass seeds?" one of the farmers asked, pointing to the bag in her hand. Karen's face flushed red. "This is my property too. I can walk wherever I please." "You're on Tom's land," Mark said firmly. "And you're spreading seeds that don't belong here. That's sabotage." Karen tried to laugh, but her voice cracked. "Don't be ridiculous. These are just grass seeds. They can't hurt anything." But the farmers knew better. "Grass in rows of crops means ruined harvest," one of them said. "You've gone too far, Karen." At that moment, Tom's tractor appeared in the distance. The sound of the engine grew louder as he finished a row and turned toward them. When he saw the group gathered at the edge of his field, he stopped the tractor and climbed down. "What's going on?" he asked. Mark stepped aside, revealing Karen with her half-empty bag. "We caught her scattering grass seeds into your soil." Tom's eyes darkened. He looked at the small patches where the seeds lay scattered. Farming was delicate. A few handfuls of the wrong seeds could spread quickly and choke the young crops. It would take days of work to repair the damage, and even then, some of the harvest might be lost. Karen lifted her chin. "You can't prove anything. Maybe those seeds just blew in from the road." Tom picked up a few seeds from the soil, rubbing them between his fingers. "These aren't wild seeds. They're the kind sold for lawns. And they're still warm from your bag." The silence grew heavy. Karen's face tightened. For once, she had no words ready. Tom did not raise his voice. He spoke slowly, and his calmness made the words even stronger. "Karen, you tried to take my tractor. You tried to use the council against me. Now you've tried to poison my work with your own hands. This isn't about beauty anymore. This is about respect. And you've shown none." The farmers around him nodded. One of them pulled out a phone. "I think the sheriff should hear about this." At the mention of the sheriff, Karen's confidence cracked. "Wait. There's no need for that. I didn't mean harm. I was only trying to prove a point." "A point?" Mark asked. "The point you proved is that you'll stop at nothing to hurt a man's living. That's not leadership. That's selfishness." Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no defense came. She turned quickly, clutching her bag, and hurried back toward her car. Tom watched her leave, his jaw firm. He knew this was not the last time she would try something. But now the town had seen more of her true colors, thanks to Sarah's sharp eyes and his neighbor's quick action. That evening, Tom walked the field carefully, removing as many grass seeds as he could. It was tiring work, but he did not complain. Mark and the other farmers stayed to help, and even Sarah joined, carefully picking seeds from the soil with her small hands. As the sun set, Tom looked at his neighbors and felt a deep gratitude. Karen could fight him with rules and tricks, but he was not alone. The land gave him strength, and the people around him gave him courage. Together, they would see this planting season through. The next morning, the story of Karen scattering grass seeds spread through town like wildfire. Sarah's father, Mark, had told a few neighbors, and by midday, everyone seemed to know. In the bakery, customers whispered while they sipped coffee. At the post office, the clerk shook her head as she told the tale. Even at the school, teachers heard from children who repeated Sarah's words with wide-eyed excitement. Karen, who once walked through town with her chin high, now felt eyes following her wherever she went. At the grocery store, two women moved their carts aside to avoid her. At the cafe, a man muttered, "There goes the one who tried to ruin Tom's crops." She tried to ignore them, pretending nothing was wrong. But inside, she boiled. "Ungrateful people," she muttered to herself as she sat in her shiny car. "I built this neighborhood. I kept it beautiful. And now they take his side." Back on the farm, Tom continued to work his fields. He was tired from pulling grass seeds out of the soil, but he did not slow down. Every row planted gave him strength. Still, he knew the damage could not be undone completely. Some seeds were buried too deep to find. He would have to deal with patches of unwanted grass when the crops grew. Despite the trouble, Tom did not complain. His neighbors had stood by him, and that gave him hope. Mark stopped by often to check in, and Sarah brought small jars of lemonade to the field. Even the tow truck driver from before passed by one afternoon and waved with a smile. "Looks like the whole town's behind you now," Mark said one evening as they leaned against the fence. Tom nodded slowly. "Yes. But Karen isn't finished. She's too proud to walk away." Mark frowned. "What do you think she'll do next?" Tom glanced at the horizon. "Something desperate. That's what worries me." Tom's words proved true sooner than expected. Karen, frustrated by the whispers and the stares, decided she had only one chance left. If she could not beat Tom with rules or tricks, she would try to outshine him. She began to plan an event, something that would make people forget his tractor and fields. A week later, posters appeared around town. Community celebration hosted by Karen. The posters promised games, music, and free food. At the bottom, in bold letters, it read, "Let's show what real beauty looks like in our neighborhood." The farmers shook their heads when they saw the posters. "She's trying to buy back respect," one of them said. Tom stayed quiet. He knew Karen's event would be loud and colorful, but it would not fill people's stomachs. Still, he decided not to interfere. He focused on his crops, letting the soil speak for him. When the day of the celebration arrived, the park was decorated with bright banners and balloons. Karen wore her best clothes and greeted guests with practiced smiles. She handed out neatly printed pamphlets about keeping the neighborhood clean and beautiful. At first, the event looked successful. Children played games, and families enjoyed the music. But when it came time for food, problems began. Karen had ordered fancy dishes from a caterer in the city, but the delivery was late. People grew hungry and restless. Finally, trays of food arrived, but there was not enough for everyone. The dishes were small and expensive looking, but they left people unsatisfied. A man whispered to his wife, "I'd rather have a basket of Tom's corn than these tiny plates." As the crowd murmured, Mark stepped forward with a grin. He had brought a crate of fresh vegetables from Tom's farm: tomatoes, cucumbers, and sweet corn. He laid them out on a table. Within minutes, people left the fancy trays behind and gathered around the fresh produce. Children bit into juicy corn, smiling as butter dripped down their chins. Adults sliced tomatoes and cucumbers, enjoying the simple taste of real food. The laughter and joy spread quickly, and soon no one cared about Karen's balloons or banners. Karen watched in horror as the crowd praised Tom's vegetables instead of her celebration. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she muttered. She tried to pull people back toward the games, but they waved her off, their hands full of corn and cucumbers. By the end of the night, Karen's event had turned into an unintended advertisement for Tom's farm. People left with smiles, carrying small bags of produce that Mark had handed out freely. The town buzzed with talk about how delicious and fresh the food was. Tom himself had not attended the celebration. He was at home, finishing work in the fields. But when Mark returned and told him what had happened, Tom shook his head with a small smile. "I didn't ask for any of this," Tom said. "I know," Mark replied. "But sometimes the truth speaks louder than banners and balloons." People saw the difference. They won't forget it. Karen sat alone in the empty park after everyone left, staring at the fallen balloons and half-eaten trays of fancy food. For the first time, her confidence wavered. She had tried everything: rules, sabotage, even a celebration, and still, the people turned toward Tom. Her pride would not let her give up completely, but deep down, she began to realize the truth: beauty without substance could not win against honest work and food from the land. The summer sun burned bright over the town. By now, Tom's crops stood tall and strong, rows of golden corn swaying with the wind. The farm looked alive, full of promise for the coming harvest. People driving past slowed their cars just to admire the sight. Every week, families stopped by Tom's small stand near the edge of his land. They bought fresh vegetables and carried baskets home with smiles. Neighbors helped one another, trading jars of pickles and loaves of bread for cucumbers and corn. The farm became more than just a field. It became the heart of the community. Karen, however, watched all of this with growing bitterness. Her community celebration had failed to win support, and people no longer listened to her lectures about neighborhood rules. Even her closest friends had drifted away, embarrassed by her behavior. She still drove her shiny car through town, but the smiles she once received were gone. One afternoon, as she sat in her driveway staring at the farm across the road, an idea struck her. "If people won't stop supporting him, maybe I can force the law to act," she whispered. She grabbed her phone and called the county office, filing another complaint against Tom. This time, she claimed his tractor was unsafe and his crops were a nuisance. A week later, an inspector arrived. Karen watched eagerly from her porch as the man walked the fields with Tom. But to her disappointment, the inspector shook Tom's hand and left with a smile. Tom's equipment was safe, and his land was properly maintained. Karen's face burned with frustration. "Why does nothing work against him?" she hissed. That evening, as Tom checked the fences along his field, Mark joined him. "I heard the county cleared you," Mark said. Tom nodded. "Yes. They found no problem." Mark kicked at the dirt. "Karen won't stop until she destroys herself." "You just keep working, Tom. The town sees what you're doing." And indeed, the town did see. When harvest season arrived, families came together to help Tom bring in the crops. Children ran between the rows, carrying baskets of tomatoes. Men lifted heavy sacks of corn. Women filled jars with vegetables to store for winter. The farm buzzed with laughter, sweat, and joy. Everyone shared in the work, and everyone shared in the reward. When the last row of corn was picked, Tom gathered the community in front of his barn. "I can't thank you enough," Tom said, his voice steady. "This farm isn't just mine. It belongs to all of us. You stood by me when times were hard, and because of that, we have food to fill our tables. The crowd cheered. Sarah clapped her hands and shouted, Tom's farm forever. The children repeated her words, and the chant echoed through the night. But not everyone celebrated. From her darkened window, Karen watched the barn lights glowing. She could hear the voices, the laughter, and the chant that praised the man she had tried so hard to defeat. Her fists clenched at her sides. The next morning, she drove past the farm on her way to town. She slowed her car and glared at the busy scene of neighbors loading wagons with food. Tom noticed her car but simply lifted his hand in a calm wave. For the first time, Karen did not wave back. Instead, she pressed the gas and drove away quickly, her chest heavy with emotions she could not name. The following days were quiet. Karen no longer stood on her porch, no longer shouted about rules or threatened to call tow trucks. She kept to herself, and her yard, once the pride of the neighborhood, began to look untended. One evening, as Tom stacked crates by the barn, Sarah approached him. Do you think she's given up? She asked. Tom looked toward Karen's house. The curtains were drawn, and no lights shone inside. Maybe, he said softly. Or maybe she's just tired of fighting against the truth. The truth was clear to everyone now. Hard work, kindness, and unity had won the town's respect. No rule book, no shiny car, no false complaint could change that. When winter came, Tom's farm fed families across the community. People carried jars, sacks, and baskets to one another, and no one went hungry. The memory of Karen's tricks faded, replaced by the stronger memory of how the town had stood together. And so, the story of Tom and his farm became a lesson told often at the cafe, the school, and the post office. Parents reminded their children, don't be like Karen, who tried to tear down what was good. Be like Tom, who planted seeds and shared the harvest. Even Karen, in the quiet of her own home, could not escape the lesson. Each time she looked out her window and saw the golden fields, she felt the weight of what she had lost, not just the battle, but the respect of her neighbors. Tom, on the other hand, gained more than a harvest. He gained trust, friendship, and a community bound together by the soil they all shared. And as he looked over the land, he smiled, knowing that no one could ever take that away.